Now
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
Jai Radha Kunj Bihari
Radha
Gopi Jamala Sodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad, Paramhamsa Paravatikacharyato, Tadasata, Śrimad is Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta, Swami Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki, Mantaraj, Śrimad Bhāgavatam Ki, Samveda Bhaktivedanta Ki, Gaur Premanandi. All glories to Samal devotees, all glories to Samal devotees, all glories to Samal devotees, all glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Lord. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Didati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Dhapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. All right, so today we are on Canto 3, Chapter 31, Text 28. Ityevam shaishvam bhutva Ityevam shaishvam bhutva Dukham paugandamevacha Dukham paugandamevacha Alabdhabipshito jnanad Alabdhabipshito jnanad Iddamanyu sucharpitaha Iddamanyu sucharpitaha Eta evam shaishavam bhutva Dukham paugandamevacha Alabdhabipshito jnanad Idhamanyu sucharpitaha Ityevam shaishvam bhutva Dukham paugandamevacha Alabdhabipshito jnanad Idhamanyu sucharpitaha Ityeham shaishvam bhutva Dukham Paugandameva cha Alabdha Bhipsito Jnanam Idhamanyu Sucharpita Iti evam shaishvam bhutva Dukham Paugandameva cha Alabdhabhipshito jnanam Idhamanyu shucharpitaha Iti evam shaishvam bhutva Dukham Paugandameva cha Alabdhabhipshito jnanam Idhamanyu Shucharpitaha Vaishnavis. Evam Shaishvam Bhutva Dukham Paugandameva cha Alabdhabhipshito jnanam Idhamanyu Shucharpitaha Vaishnavis. Please, we'll be here all morning. Estevam Shashvam Bhutva Dukham Paugandameva cha Alabdhabhipshito jnanam Idhamanyu Sucharpitaha Iti evam shaishvam bhutva Dukham Paugandameva cha Alabdhabhipshito jnanam Idhamanyu Shucharpitaha Iti evam shaishvam bhutva Dukham Paugandameva cha Alabdhabhipshito jnanam Idhamanyu Shucharpitaha Iti evam in this way. Shaishavam childhood. Bhutva having undergone. Dukham distress. Paugandam boyhood. Eva, even. Cha, and. Alabdha, not achieved. Abhipshitaha, he who desires. Agyanat, due to ignorance. Idha, kindled. Manyuhu, overcome. So the translation is, in this way the child passes through his childhood, suffering different kinds of distress, and attains boyhood. In boyhood also, he suffers pain over desires to get things he can never achieve. And thus, due to ignorance, he becomes angry and sorry. So please repeat. In this way, the child passes through his childhood, suffering different kinds of distress, and attains boyhood. In boyhood also, he suffers pain over desires to get things he can never achieve. And thus, due to ignorance, he becomes angry and sorry. Okay, so here is the purport by Srila Prabhupada. From birth up to the end of 5 years of age is called childhood. After 5 years, up to the end of the 15th year is called Pauganda. At 16 years of age, youth begins. The distresses of childhood are already explained. But when the child attains boyhood, he is enrolled in a school which he does not like. He wants to play, but he is forced to go to school. and study and take responsibility for passing examinations. Another kind of distress is that he wants to get some things with which to play, but the circumstances may be such that he is not able to attain them, and thus he becomes aggrieved and feels pain. In one word, he is unhappy, even in his boyhood, just as he was unhappy in his childhood. What to speak of youth? Boys are apt to create so many artificial demands for playing, and when they do not attain satisfaction, they become furious with anger, and the result is suffering. Iti evam shaishavam bhutva dukam pogandam evacha alabdha pshito jnanad idamanyu shucharpitaha. In this way, the child passes through his childhood, suffering different kinds of distress, and attains boyhood. In boyhood also, he suffers pain over desires to get things he can never achieve. And thus, due to ignorance, he becomes angry and sorry. Of course, this whole section is a very instructive and in some cases very graphic view at the general sojourn through material life as a living entity is born and undergoes various kinds of difficulties. Of course, here we've been focusing most largely on the process of the child coming out of the womb, which is indeed traumatic. Most people are aware that death is traumatic, but not so many people are really aware of the idea of birth being traumatic as well for the child. But of course, how can it be otherwise when you think about the child having to squeeze through a very narrow passage and come out? And he has been tortured in the womb, and now he's tortured in a new environment that is completely foreign. The body is just beginning to develop an immune system. The body is just beginning to get used to the outside world. So it is very traumatizing. What's interesting, though, when we go through deep difficulty, pain, fear, or trauma, we are apt to remember other times when we went through deep pain, fear, or trauma. But when we are in a situation where things are, not very traumatic at the present moment, we remember that. We remember all the times when things are not very traumatic. In fact, we almost as if we never had any bad times. We just think, things are always just kind of middling. Maybe I'm not ecstatic, but this world is passable. And I know over the hill, one day, my ship will come in. I will have my day. Every dog has his day. I will reach the rainbow, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I will have my house upon the hill. There's so many of these metaphors in our everyday language that, we will have our moment in the sun. There's so many of these kind of metaphors. We believe that some way, somehow, someday, we will get a bite of the big apple. We will enjoy it. And this is what keeps us going. But these traumas, we don't identify with. We don't identify with them at all. So we hear Krishna Bahirmukha Hanya Bhogavanchakare, Nikatastamaya Japati Dhare, which is in the Prema Vivarg. And says the living entity turns his face away from Krishna, Krishna Bahirmukha, face is mukha, bahir is away. And by turning his face away from Krishna, Maya slaps him down. And so here is our welcome to the material world, birth. Here is what we get stuck in a womb for 8, 9 months, whatever it is. As we're hearing a lot about worms, they're worms and they're biting us, various insects. And we have no ability to do anything about it. We are just suffering. We all know what it's like to be very, very tired asleep. And you hear that as it goes right to your ear. And you know that that little guy is sucking the blood out of your ear at that moment. You go like that, and then, a few minutes, and it goes to the other ear, and you flap him away, and you can hardly get any rest because these little guys are trying to enjoy your bloodstream, which to them is beyond nectar. So you have to live with it somehow or other and just see how cruel material nature is, It's like this. But we wanted to enjoy separate from Krishna, so now we get the chance at the material world, and this is our welcome. As I think of it, when the living entity falls into the material world, we get the theme song to the material world. And what is the theme song to the material world? I can't get no satisfaction. It's the perfect theme song to the material world. When I'm riding in my car and a man comes on the radio and he's telling me more and more some useless information bound to fire my imagination. I can't get no. So this is the theme song to the material world, You can't get no satisfaction here, no matter where you go or what you do. Of course, as devotees, we eventually meet a devotee. We get a book or some kind of invitation. And when we get that invitation, we become part of the circle of devotees. And we learn a new song. And that song is, we gotta get out of this place if it's the last thing we ever do. We gotta get out of this place. There's a better life for me and you. You know it and I know it too. So these songs I think of as kind of somehow or another sort of getting right to the essence of it, We have to somehow take it very seriously. So if we can somehow hear Bhāgavatam and take it very seriously, that will be the thing that pulls us out of the material world. So we have to be very eager listeners. About a month or so ago, one of our pujaris from Ukraine, Mother Bakreshwari, was giving class, and she said, we have to be ugra shrava, which means ferocious listener. And I thought that was a great visual image, that we have to listen ferociously to the Śrimad Bhāgavatam. And if we're able to take advantage of the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, it will pull us out of the material world. But even if we're not so ferocious, if we continue to hear Śrimad Bhāgavatam, eventually it will penetrate through all those thick layers. There's a nice story in the Puranas that there was a very pious river called the Tungabhadra. And on this Tungabhadra river, there was a beautiful city. And in that city lived a Brahmana. And his name was Atmadev. And Atmadev had a wife, and she was a very disagreeable lady. Her name was Dooley. So, but he was very, very opulent. They had all kinds of money and everything you could want, but they had no children. So Atmadev was very disturbed that everything seemed right in his life, but no children. Just see how cruel his material nature. So Atmadev decided he would go into the forest and perform penances. They had tried other things, various fire sacrifices, and somehow they couldn't have any children. So he went into the forest, and after spending some time in the forest, Atmadev happened across a sannyasi who had been living in the forest as a hermit. And the sannyasi could tell that Atmadev was not very happy. He said, "My dear Atmadev, what is wrong with your life?" And Atmadev said, "Actually, I have so many things. We are well-to-do. We have things. We live in a beautiful city in a nice house. But I have no children." And the sannyasi said, "Why do you want children? They're just trouble." And I have looked at your horoscope, and your horoscope tells me that you are destined not to have any children for the next 7 lives. So I would suggest to you, my dear Atmadev, just don't worry about having children. Just stay in the forest like me, and you'll be happy. But Atmadev was not one to give up easily. So Atmadev said, "No, my dear sannyasi Prabhu, I really want children. There must be some way that you can allow me to have children." So the sannyasi thought about it. And he said, all right, Atmadev, if you want children, so take this fruit. I have done a sacrifice, and this fruit will give you a very pious son who will be very, wonderful, will know the Vedas, and you will be happy by having this son. But you have to give up all anger and live a very focused life and perform some fasting penances. And your wife must do the same. So Atmadev was very happy. He took the fruit and he came back to his wife, Dunduli, and he said, "Oh, look, Dunduli, I met a sannyasi in the forest, and he gave me this fruit, and if you eat this fruit, you will become pregnant, and we will have a wonderful son, but we have to be free from anger, and we have to do some fasting." So Dunduli had already done some fasting. She wasn't interested in doing any more fasting. So she thought, oh, this is just a lot of trouble. So she took the fruit, and she spoke to one of her neighbors, and her neighbor said, having children is a lot of disturbance, when you first have children, there's the whole time where you can't sleep because the child is always waking up in the middle of the night, and there's the brown surprises and all those other kind of things that you have to deal with when you have children. And so I think it's better that, so Dunduli's hearing a similar thing to what Atmavan had heard from the sannyasi. It's actually a lot of trouble. So Dunduli thinks, yes, it's a lot of trouble to have children. Probably better I don't have children. And Dunduli had a sister, and she went to her sister, and her sister says, "My dear older sister, actually I'm pregnant, and I don't want this child. I will give this child to you, and you can say that this is your child. No one will ever know, but you have to hide yourself away for 9 months so people don't know that you're not actually pregnant. And when I deliver my child, I'll say it was stillborn and the child didn't survive. So please, I think this is a good plan. And so when Dunduli heard this, she thought, this is great, I don't have to fast. And my husband really wants a child so we can have one, and this is the easy way to do it. So she took the fruit that had been given by her husband, that had been given by the sannyas, and she threw it out. And a cow ate the fruit. And the cow gave birth to a human child with cow ears. And that child got named Gokarna. So the child was born with cow ears. And he was a very auspicious child. He studied the Vedas. And at the same time, the child that had actually been the child of Dunduli's sister grew up as the child of Atmavan and Dunduli. So this child was a rascal in every sense of the word. He was just difficulty personified. He was always creating mischief, and he was wicked and self-centered and caused trouble to other people. Eventually he grew up to be a bandit, a dacoit, and he lived with prostitutes. And so the people of the town thought, wow, this is amazing that Atmavan was so disturbed that he didn't have any children. And now he's got 2 children. However, because this child was so disturbing, Atmavan couldn't bear it, and he decided to take sannyas. So he left, and eventually he came to the same situation that he had been asked at the very beginning when he met the sannyasi. So he wound up giving up family life because it was so disturbing. And his wife, Duli, was so disturbed by her rascal son that she jumped in a well and killed herself. So she committed suicide as a result of her son. But this son went on to create all kinds of havoc. And he lived a very wretched, sinful life. And to support his life with various prostitutes, he would rob people. But the king's ministers learned about his nefarious actions. And so they came, and they were trying to find where he was. The prostitutes learned about this, that the king was looking for their husband or consort, And so they thought, we're in danger, because if the king's men catch our husband and do something, we may also be implicated. So all the wives got together and tied the husband up and put him in the fire and killed him. So he was killed as a result. His nasty life had a nastier ending, and he became a big ghost. And he was troubling everybody in the area, this big ghost. And of course, there was Gokarna, and he was performing various sacrifices. This big ghost came to him and said, Gokarna, I'm your brother. Do something. I'm living this miserable life as a ghost. Please help me some kind of way. Please help me. So Gokarna said, all right, I will try to help you some kind of way. So Gokarna, he decided that he would approach the demigods, and he asked the demigods, what they could do, and they all said, approach the sun god. The sun god will be able to help you. So he approached Surya, and Surya said, the only way your half-brother will be saved is if he hears Śrimad Bhāgavatam. That's the only way he can be saved, if he hears Śrimad Bhāgavatam. So this is what Gokarna decided to do. He got a bamboo, with segments, and there were 7 segments in this stick of bamboo. And he asked his brother, please come and sit inside this bamboo. and listen to Śrimad Bhāgavatam. So Gokarna explained, it was like, a repeat of the episode with Sukadeva Goswami and Pariksit. So here was Gokarna reciting Śrimad Bhāgavatam. And when he passed the first day, the first rung of the bamboo opened, and then when he passed the second day, the second rung opened, and the third rung, and finally he got to the seventh day, and the seventh and topmost segment of the bamboo exploded, and his sinful brother was taken away and went to the abode of Narayan by airship. And just like with the Pariksit episode, there were other people listening to the Bhagavatam. So when they all saw this, they saw this ghostly dacoit that had been condemned to be a ghost go back to the spiritual world. And so the audience members, they naturally asked Gokarna, well, we were also listening to Bhagavatam, so why didn't we go back also? And Gokarna replied, because this sinful brother of his, who was named Dundukari, that Dundukari was very eager to hear. He was in a difficult situation. So because of the distress, then he was listening to every word of Bhagavatam and trying to put it into his heart. And as a result, by hearing Bhagavatam, he was delivered immediately, as was Pariksit when he heard from Sukadeva Goswami. He was also delivered. So sometimes, of course, when you're in a difficult position, then you hear much more attentively. And I really couldn't help, but this verse set me off on something, because I don't know if other people experience this, but it certainly happened to me lately. It's like the material world is playing back various movie scenes from my previous life, my whole earlier life, and this thing with the children, I remember being, I don't know, something like 3 or 4 years old in the Bronx, where my father was from Poland and my mother was also from Poland, but she was part Czech, and after World War II, they came here to New York City, and they lived here, and then, my father had a DVM, Doctorate of Veterinary Medicine, from Poland, but that was no good in America. It didn't count for anything. So he had to go to night college while he worked in a hotel, and he went to night college, and he completed his U.S. certified DVM degree. So I remember those years of looking out and seeing, a fire escape in the back of. I know these images are very vivid in my mind, even though I must have been like 3 or 4 years old, or maybe not even, and thinking, this is hell. I don't know, somehow or another, it seemed like that to me. And I remember, when you're that little, the difference between fantasy and reality is like 2 fingers, not even, I remember this giant bird, I had a name for it. It was called the Labinjan. It's not an English word, it's not a Polish word. I don't know where it came from, and it was kind of terrifying to me. And I would see it, it seemed like a huge version of a blackbird, something like that. And I remember one time going into the kitchen and seeing a robot in the kitchen and being terrified. I remember also around that age, I was playing in one of the rooms of our apartment, And there was somebody had left a cane, and I was using the cane, swinging it around, kind of twirling it around, and I hit a not a chandelier, but a cut glass crystal bowl that my mother had that she'd brought from the old country, and it shattered in a million pieces. And I remember getting nicely spanked for that. My parents were not shy with, with corporal punishment, you know. Just see how cruel is the material world. Then my father, he completed his DVM, and he got a job with the United States government, actually the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. And he became a meat inspector. And we left the Bronx, and he was assigned to Missouri, the state of Missouri. And we first went to a place called Sedalia, Missouri. Then we went to a place called Union, Missouri. Then we went to a place called Monette, Missouri. Then we went finally to a place called Anderson, Missouri. So my father, every 2 years, would get transferred from one of these places to another. And the thing that was common among all these places, Sedalia, Missouri, Union, Missouri, Monette, Missouri, and Anderson, Missouri, was there was a chicken plant in these places where thousands and thousands of chickens are killed every day. And my father was the person to inspect them to make sure that they were up to USDA standards. I won't get into that very much right now, but that, I remember getting on an airplane. You know, I must have been about 6 years old or something like that. And as I got on the airplane, people had given us gifts as we were departing, you know, the Bronx and moving to Missouri. And I remember getting a Donald Duck toy, and this little thing, you've seen them, they give them to kids all the time, where it's water and it's got plastic, and in between there's this glitter, and you put it one way and the glitter goes to the bottom. Put it the other way, the glitter goes the other way. I remember it distinctly. And when we got off the airplane in Missouri, I forgot to take those things. And we got off the plane, and I was mortified that I had lost my Donald Duck and my little sparkly toy. And I tried to, tell the stewardesses, and they said, all right, you can go. They actually went with me back on the plane. They wouldn't do that these days, but they did at that time. Went back on the plane. We looked for it, couldn't find it. So just see how cruel is the material world. We have these, fixations. And then I remember, going to, I don't remember much about Sedalia, Missouri. I was pretty small then. I just remember this huge house. And of course, when you're real little, everything seems cavernous and gigantic, And then I remember in Union, Missouri, we lived next to an empty lot, which eventually was worked over, and it became the first Safeway that I ever saw. We had, back then there were no big chain grocery stores. This was the first mega grocery store that I ever saw. And we had a sandbox. And I remember how wonderful the sandbox seemed. Both my sister and I. This was one of the few toys that we had that we really enjoyed. And later on, we would get a sandbox in other places where we lived. And there was a point where we lived next to another family, and that family had a whole group of girls. They were about 4 or 5 sisters that were all together, and they had many other girlfriends. And I was the only boy. And so the girls all got together and decided that they wanted to stage a marriage. So they dressed me up as like a little groom, and there was a girl, and they dressed her up like the bride, you know. And then worse than that, they took photos of it. And then they gave it to my parents. And my father said, "Oh, now you're married." And I said, "No, I'm too young. I didn't get married. It was just a game." And you know how parents do with children. They said, "No, no, yeah, she's your wife now," and this and that and the other. So I remember being traumatized by that. You know, this is the kind of thing that turns people into sannyasis later on. So but at any rate, just see how material world works. You know, of course, you can understand how parents every once in a while get the chance to get back at the kids for years and years of the kids causing all kinds of harassment to the parents. And every once in a while, the parents, you know, tell their children something like that, which plays with their mind. Like Prabhupada's father telling him that he ate a watermelon seed and a watermelon would grow in his stomach. You know, this kind of thing that parents do to children to kind of, you know, get back at years of the child's, you know, disturbing qualities. So I remember, you know, wanting all sorts of different toys, mostly not getting them, as it mentions here in this verse. Somehow I lived through it, believe it or not. I know it's kind of hard to understand that it's possible, but you know, I can even remember the kind of toys, this thing called Mr. Machine. It was a really crummy looking robot, you know, that would wind up and it would kind of, in a very halting way, sort of move back and forth. I thought that would be so nice, and I never got one. I tell the story that about this time when we moved to Anderson, Missouri, the place that we stayed for a long time. My father was positioned there, and that's where I essentially grew up. It was a very small town. When we moved there, I had this real intense desire to see Disneyland. I would look at brochures of Disneyland. I would see all the rides that they had there in Disneyland. And I've told this story a number of times, so I won't get into detail about it. And my parents never had any inclination to go to Disneyland. But later on, when I had gone to 2 years of college and I was now living in San Francisco, California, my parents called me up and said, "Oh, we decided to visit Los Angeles, so why don't you come down and we'll go to Disneyland?" But now I was 24 years old, and Disneyland had absolutely no interest. I had no interest in it at all. I went down there just by pro forma because I had to go meet my parents, so we went down there, and I remember being totally bored. But at one point, here it was, this great desire, but here at another point in life, this desire was finally realized, and I had no real interest in it. I remember visiting Aunt Adela, who lived in East Orange, New Jersey, and my parents came out to do that. We went out to the boardwalk somewhere. I forget where that boardwalk was. Maybe it was Atlantic City. I don't remember anymore. Somewhere I remember this big boardwalk and the sand being very hot. And I was walking down the boardwalk, and a big splinter came out of the boards, and it went right into my toe. And my whole toe was almost ripped up, and it just bled like anything. And, you know, you're on a vacation, you're thinking about swimming, you're thinking about enjoyment, and suddenly your whole toe you have to go to the hospital, and they have to sew it up and pull the splinter out. And I would just see material nature, how cruel is material nature. So these kind of things are happening. I remember later on, I'm a teenager now, and I'm in Anderson, Missouri. I was into music at that point, and I wanted to play in a rock band. So I got this Farfisa organ. Some of you who may have followed music may know what a Farfisa organ is. It was a cheap sort of Italian combo organ that people were really fond of back in that time. And I wanted to get a Leslie for it, which is a rotating speaker. Some of you may know what a Leslie is. So I found one of my friends who was actually living on a farm, and he knew a farmer who was a mass farmer who was growing green beans. We called him Tommy Green Bean. His actual name was Tommy Aldridge. So for a whole summer, we moved irrigation pipe, this aluminum pipe that's about 30 feet long, and they come in segments, and the segments lock together, and they pump water through it, and they have these big spigots, and they irrigate the beans while they're growing. And every 5 or 6 hours, you have to move it. It saturates the ground, and then you move it to the next area. And so it was incredibly physically taxing work. You're working in that much of mud because you're right where the water is being sprayed out. You're walking through this heavy mud, and then you lift up the pipe, which is full of water, and it's very heavy. But a few seconds later, the water is draining out, and it's very light then, and then you move it over about 40, 50 feet, and then you hook it back up, and again water gets, when you finish the whole link, then you can cap the end, and again water comes out there. So all this arduous labor, and I wanted the Leslie. I got enough money. It was like $500 or something like that at that time, which would be much more money at this time. And I went to a nearby town, Joplin, Missouri, and I bought the Leslie speaker. But the person who sold it to me didn't know what they were doing and sold me the wrong kind, one that would not hook up to my organ. And so I took it back and said, well, it doesn't work. It can't be hooked up. And they said, well, we can't refund your money. But instead, they sold me this other cheaper thing that didn't work as well. So again, all these angst of growing up, just see how cruel is the material world. So you go, I'm amazed I remember these things. I don't know why they stick out in my mind. But they seem almost like a dream, or some kind of I don't know if any of you all have the same kind of thing. These scenes are played through, and it just brings out these things that Bhāgavatam is saying, that it's almost like it happened to somebody else, or I watched a movie instead, and this wasn't my life, it was somebody else's life. And the material world is just designed to thwart our desires. But we don't know that. And we have this hope against hope. We have this firm belief that this will not continue to happen. It may have happened once or twice, but it won't continue to happen. That one day we will actually feel satisfied in the material world. If it ever happens to any of you, ring me up or get me on WhatsApp. I want to hear about it. If you actually find a point in time in the material world where things actually line up and everything works for you. All right, I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. We really don't have hardly any time now, but if there's some simple or quick question, we'll take a question or two, and then we'll adjourn so you all can get on with the process of setting up for Rath Yatra. Yes, the mic is there. What's that?
do we forget all these
How do we forget them?
unnecessary things? Like I guess all of us will get this experience if you want to believe certain things.
Right,
in our mind.
right, right. So by constantly focusing on Krishna. I think in one sense it's a benediction. I remember them to the point that it makes me realize how two-dimensional. It's like a big dream, really. It really is, you know, that nothing in this world is permanent. Nothing in this world will actually really satisfy you. And when I connect with all these different episodes in my life, I can see how that's true. That none of this ever made me satisfied. None of it actually was free from all kinds of difficulty at the time that I was going through them. I didn't even really explain the more devastating parts of my life that took place. But, you know, some way or another, you know, eventually you come to learn about Krishna consciousness. And then they say that when you die, your whole life flashes before you. This is kind of like a slow motion version of it. And by engaging in Krishna consciousness, you begin to see how these episodes are a realization or a real life testimonial to what we're reading in the pages of Bhāgavatam. And we see just how cruel the material world actually is. That the living entity works hard, as we're hearing here. He suffers in birth, he suffers at death, in between he suffers with old age and disease. We suffer all the time, but whenever we're not extremely suffering, we think everything is good. You know, just a little bit of relief from, as it mentioned, there's a wonderful chapter. Actually, there's two chapters I was going to get into, but we didn't have time. One of them was the chapter where Lord Chaitanya instructs Sanatana Goswami. That's where that verse about the living entity falling from the material world, from turning his face away, where that verse is quoted. And, you know, Sanatana Goswami says, people say I'm a very, you know, learned man, but actually I don't know who I am. And if I don't know who I am, how can I be bettered? How can I better myself at all? But Lord Chaitanya says, no, you actually do know the imports of the Vedas. So that is a very nice chapter. And then he explains about the living entity being originally Jiva Tattva. There's what he calls Chit Shakti, Jiva Shakti, and Maya Shakti. So he explains about those energies. And then there's the other section, which is very nice. It's the 14th chapter of the 5th canto, the great forest of material existence. And that's a very interesting chapter where it gives all these analogies for the living entity going into the forest to try to find things to sell. But instead, he meets owls and scorpions, and he gets in a forest fire and all these kind of things, which is a very, you know, graphic. Also, it's like this section here. Shows how one struggles in the material world, and what you get at the end of the struggles? Nothing. You know? Unless you actually become Krishna conscious and benefit from it. All right. So thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Śrimad Bhāgavatam. All glories to Vaishnava devotees of Lord Hare Krishna. Yeah.
This Yamva Bismaran Bhavan, like verse is there, right?
What's that?
You know, at the time of death, whatever you think of, you'll become.
Yes.